Dead on Your Feet, Arthur Grant Michaels, St. Martin's Press, New York, 1993. Stan Kraychik Mystery, Book 3, narrator Eric Aust. In memory of Tajana and Andre, with gratitude and respect and love, thanks to the patience and generosity of my friends. Chapter 14, Corpse de Ballet. Early the next morning, with my front side docked snugly against Rafik's back, we woke with the sun and with Sugar Baby's raspy tongue alternately scrubbing my cheek, then his. Rafik got up first, and while he showered, I shuffled into the kitchen and performed the daily ritual with some Bourbon Santos coffee beans. I picked up yesterday afternoon. Life was resuming an ordinary course, or so it seemed. I had just finished setting the breakfast table when Rafik appeared in the kitchen, freshly showered and completely dressed with his dance bag slung over one shoulder. He was ready to face the outside world. "No coffee?" I asked. "I have an important meeting at the studio." A brief and urgent embrace followed, and he was gone, leaving me to breakfast with Sugar Baby. I poured myself a mugful of the rich Brazilian brew, then went to the bedroom to pick up after last night's party games. Rafik's leather duds lay on the floor, randomly strewn around the bed where they'd been dropped during the course of the night. I picked up one piece, a half harness, and held it in my free hand. It comprised a strap of black leather about an inch wide, the two ends joined by a heavy chrome ring that was itself connected to the main belt by a second, narrower strip. When worn, the half harness embraced the hips along the pelvic crest. The ring was a portal for the obvious, and the connecting strap ran deep within the body's main crevice. The cross tensions among the parts caused a synergy of ecstasy in the loins. The half harness was my favorite item in Rafik's collection, partly because of its functional simplicity, and partly because of the sexy, flattering line it gave the hips, even mine. I sniffed at the leather and wondered again about its strange appeal. I caught Sugar Baby watching me. I asked her, "Any regrets, doll?" Ineffable as ever, Sugar replied, "I agree," I said, and went to the shower. When I stopped my steps, I was surprised to find that Nicole hadn't arrived yet. Ramon told me that she called earlier to say she'd be in late. I grabbed the chance to do some more legwork on the Max Harkey case, and what better place to do it than the Boston City Ballet? I arrived there just in time to watch the end of company class, the Grand Allegro, that included the bigger jumps and the aerial tours. Madame Rebenskaya was teaching this morning, marshalling the dancers with a voice that rode high on the wild storm of piano music. From the open door of the studio came the warm, moist air of a ballet class well in progress. At the far end of the studio, ranks of ballerinas dragged their tired bodies into position, prepared themselves grimly, and then called upon unnatural energies to send their beings aloft. Suddenly, leaping and spinning like airborne furies, row upon row of women executed and repeated the intricate combination, the enchainment. While the music surged louder and stronger from the piano, cramming the air with intense sound as if to saturate and replenish the poor dancing creatures with sonic energy. On it went until one final crashing chord declared an unquestioned completion of the exercise. All was silent when Madame Rebenskaya spoke with a practiced stage whisper, uttering a single word, a single syllable. "Men!" The first quartet of male dancers silently took their places at the back of the studio and set themselves into preparatory positions. Among them was Scott Malloy in all his youthful, plump-muscled glory. "Eee!" screeched Madame Rebenskaya, and the piano responded with renewed vigor, with sonorous chords and driving rhythms, even further beyond the torrents of sound it had produced for the women, as though the measures of music were now being expanded and filled to reflect the blunt potency of masculine strength. And eventually, the men launched themselves upward and lingered mid-air, to execute their movements as if in slow motion, in brazen denial of gravity. Their sculpted, finely honed muscles defied such mundane limits as the Earth's downward pull, and when their flight was spent, they descended from the heights without surrender, still arrogantly buoyant, eschewing a pedestrian thump for the feathery whisper of a leather slipper settling softly onto a wooden floor. Ballet, like other wonders of the world, seemed to define itself by contradicting nature. Yet, watching these men and their feats of derry-do, I couldn't help wondering about the source of their machismo, the fierce energy that propelled them into the air, especially since I'd seen some of them in tulle skirts and in point. Just about the time my attention was beginning to flag from the unceasing visual and aerial stimulation, the men finished their grueling work. Then the entire company quickly arranged itself on the vast studio floor for the reverence, which is the traditional show of formal respect and gratitude to the teacher, the musician, and the art itself, coming at the end of class when the body's adrenaline and confidence are surging. The reverence was probably devised by some clever Russian ballet master to keep his dancers humble. It forces them to subvert that rush of power into the calmest, simplest movements. Times have changed, though, and many dancers use the reverence to improvise extravagant curtain calls, some of which will never be taken on the stage. After the final chords had faded and the dancers' poses were placidly fixed, Madame Rubinskaya spoke humbly, as if addressing her own muse. "Thank you," she said. Those two words caused an ovation from the dancers. The modest smile on Madame Rubinskaya's face proved that she still enjoyed the sound of applause. The class dispersed, and eventually Scott Malloy came out of the studio. I stepped up to him and said, "Hello." "What do you want?" he said brusquely. "Just a few minutes with you." "What now?" "I want to ask you about Max Harkey." "I thought we already did that." I smiled an obsequious smile. "That was round one," he said. "I don't have time today." He looked around the lobby nervously as though he expected to see someone there, someone he really didn't want to see. Once again, I was struck by the young dancer's complexion, the lack of any lines or pores, and by his slim hips. How could everything be so firmly defined? He began to walk away. I said, "What was the last thing you said to Max Harkey?" Scott Malloy turned back toward me, though, thought a moment, then said with a sardonic grin, "I said good night." "Was that at the dinner party, or did you see him again that night?" He narrowed his eyes, but said nothing. I pressed him. "I keep hearing that you were in love with Max." "From who?" "Quite a few people. Marshall Zander, Elisa Cortland, even Rafik." "Especially Elisa," he said with an angry little snort. "She'd enjoy saying something like that." "Is it true?" I said. Our eyes connected long enough for me to sense that behind the facade of Scott Malloy's angry young man dwelt an extremely hurt and lonely little boy. Keeping my gaze focused directly into his eyes, I repeated my question with all the sympathetic fervor I could muster. "Were you in love with Max?" Something shifted in his face, perhaps because I had asked the question so directly, with so much applied warmth and concern, or perhaps because a gay man was asking it, or perhaps because Scott Malloy's defenses were down after the rigors of ballet class, or perhaps because this young man's moment of truth had finally arrived and I happened to be the catalyst for the event. Whatever the cause, I sensed that he wanted to open his heart at last, to break through the oppressive bonds of his past, to disclose the news of his truest self. He said quietly, "Let's talk somewhere else." He led me down a corridor and through a door that opened onto a stairwell. We ascended 2 flights of stairs to a door that led outside onto the roof of the building. The sun was bright and the sky was clear, with all the old rooftops of the South End in view. We could have been in Europe. I half expected some kind of garden cafe up there, but there was nothing except the huge, pebbled asphalt roof and numerous skylights. Scott was quite sweaty from ballet class, so we sat in the sun on the warm pebbles with our backs propped against one of the skylights. He began, I don't know why I'm telling you this. And then he paused. I encouraged him. Sometimes it helps to tell someone, especially someone who doesn't know you well, like me. I guess, he said uncertainly. But I don't know how to begin. Just say the things that want to be said. You know what they are. He looked at me with those little boy eyes. I wanted Max Harkey to be my father. I nodded as if I understood and accepted his statement, though I wasn't sure if he meant father and son or daddy and boy. But I wanted more too, he added, then looked away. Go on, I said. Just talk. It's all right. I wanted him to love me back. I wanted to be his favorite dancer. I wanted him to choose me first of all the other men. Again, he turned his eyes on me. Isn't that disgusting? It sounds so weak when I hear myself say it. Not at all, I said. We all want unconditional love, acceptance. It's a human need. Don't be ashamed of it. After all, didn't most organized religions exploit that very need? Scott continued. But it was in everything I did, everything I said and pretended to want. I did it all to please Max. That's part of love. It's okay, said the unauthorized expert on such matters. But he didn't notice me. He only wanted women, so I began dating women too, but even that was just to please Max, to make him accept me. Did it work? He shook his head. But I didn't know what else to do, so I tried to give up on him. But it was all an act. No matter what I told myself in my heart, I still loved him. Then Max finally did something that really pissed me off. It changed everything. Another long pause. Well, I said, he chose another dancer, an obviously gay guy, for a big role that I should have gotten. I was perfect for the part, and instead this raging queen got it. And all that time I thought Max hated gay men. I was pretending to be straight, all for him, and it didn't even matter. So how did that change everything? Scott hesitated. One day I went to see him at home to tell him finally how I felt about him. I told him everything, that I loved him, and then I asked him if he felt anything for me. And? He laughed at me. All became quiet around us. A slight breeze played with Scott Malloy's fine blonde hair. Strands of it fluttered like golden threads in the bright sun. Max Harkey must have been genuinely straight, for how else could he have refused the preferred love and beauty of this dancer who possessed all the natural grace and strength of a young Palomino stallion? What happened after that, Scott? I made a big scene. I was screaming at him, blaming him for making me pretend to be straight when it didn't make any difference to him. It was all for nothing. Worse, it may have worked against you, I said. What do you mean? Sometimes people can accept others more easily when they're honest about themselves rather than hiding who they really are. I think you're wrong. Most people hate the truth. Well, somebody always will, I said with a shrug. He went on. That's what happened with Max. After I told him everything, confessed to him, the next thing I knew, the whole company was gossiping about him, how I was in love with him. First they talked behind my back, then right to my face. I recalled Elisa Cortland's version of the same story, how Scott had confronted Max in front of the ballet company, not in private as he was telling me now. I said, it's too bad Max handled it that way, telling the company, I mean. I guess I got what I deserved, he replied with vexation. That's not true, Scott. You had a dream of love, but it was one that could never materialize, at least with Max. The only mistake you made was to deny your own needs and try to become someone else to win him over. But the important thing is that you didn't run away in shame. You stayed with the company. I had no choice. You did have a choice, and you did the brave thing. He laughed cynically. I'm not brave. In fact, if this is what it's going to be like, he said, I don't want to be gay. At least with women, there's no punishment or shame. You don't have to hide anything. You can do what you want in public. And live a private lie, I said. Is that why you're dating Elisa now? His young face tightened suddenly. Then he admitted, if I couldn't have the great Max Harkey, I could at least get his mistress. I thought of myself and Rafik, how I was willing to accept the crumbs of his love by washing the hair of his girlfriend. Scott added, Max had already dumped her anyway, and so you swooped in to save her. You make it sound bad. No, just desperate, like me, in fact. But you have Rafik. That's a saga in itself, I replied. I know, he said. You do? His little boy eyes were suddenly back in action again. Don't you know how much Rafik loves you? He asked. Scott, so many people have been saying Rafik loves Stan to me lately that it's beginning to sound like a household phrase. I guess my version of the story is a little different. Then you're in for a big surprise, he said, modulating his voice to give the cliche the weight of an irrefutable maxim. I checked my watch. It was almost noon time. I've got to go to work. I gave him one of my business cards. If you want to talk some more about this, call me. For some people coming out in the most difficult milestone they face, just don't settle for the easy way. Scott, unless that's what you really want. He pursed his lips and drew them back into a smile. You know, I didn't like you at first, he said, but I guess you're all right. Maybe even kind of nice. More persistent than nice, I replied. I had, after all, got him to confide in me while I'd given little of my own self. My early shrinks training still came in handy. We got up and went back inside the building. When we descended the stairs and re-entered the lobby, outside the grand studio, I noticed a small group of police officers waiting in there. I also saw Elisa Cortland talking with them. She turned toward us, and after a moment, recognition gave a startled look. There he is! She yelled to the police and pointed at us. Scott Malloy and I froze in our tracks. The police ran toward us and grabbed both of us, wrenching our arms behind our backs and shoving us up against the wall. In spite of my panic, I was hoping that Scott wasn't seeing this encounter with the cops as yet another punitive experience for a gay man. Which one of you is Scott Malloy? Said one officer. Scott identified himself and was rewarded by having his arm pushed harder up towards his shoulders. The officer who was restraining me released me immediately. No apology. I watched the cops haul Scott away while Elisa followed him. Her face had a look of victory. The only thing I heard Scott say was, I didn't lay a finger on her. It was then that I finally realized that even though I had no idea about who had done what to whom or why during any of the events surrounding Max Harkey's death, I had already become too involved with the case and its attendant personalities to quit now. Anything half done is not done at all. There was nothing to do but see this thing through to the end. I was just leaving the ballet studios, heading toward the main door when I was intercepted by Marshal Xander. He looked tired and his voice sounded weary and disillusioned. Apparently his tranquilizers were losing their effect. The police act in the most illogical way. Instead of finding Max's killer, they arrest a young dancer on charges of assault and battery of a young woman. Is that what happened? According to Elisa, he said, apparently she and Scott had a big fight this morning and Scott threatened her. He seems incapable of violence like that. You can never tell, said Marshal Xander. By the way, he added, did you enjoy your lunch with Rika? He punctuated his question with a sluggish wink, a failed attempt at camaraderie. Rico had assured me that Marshall would never find out about our extravagant room service meal, yet he obviously had. It was very pleasant, I said. Thank you for your generous hospitality. It doesn't cost me a thing. I own the hotel and everything in it. Except, of course, Rico. He raised his voice when he added, he was yours for the taking. I scanned the lobby to see if anyone had heard him, especially if Rafik might be nearby. The coast was clear. Then he continued, speaking more discreetly. Your friend, Rafik, will be receiving some good news regarding Max's will. You've seen the will, then? I'm Max's executor, he replied. Then you must know what happened to his diary. If there was one, it would be with the rest of his belongings. It wasn't, I said. Maybe the police have it. They never found one. Then perhaps there never was a diary. Rico said there was. Rico fabricates, he said quickly. Then he chuckled and added, I should think you would know about that. I ignored his taunt. Can I ask you one more thing? By all means, he said agreeably. I'll help you any way I can. Do people who support big arts organizations always spend so much time on the premises? You sound suspicious of me. I'm sorry you feel that way. Because as I've said before, I do like you. As for your question, I can give an honest, direct answer. Some benefactors like to write a big check and have done with it. Then they show up for the gala events and opening nights, but I prefer to be actively engaged to see where my money is going. Besides, I love ballet. I love everything about it, the rehearsals, the classes, the dancers, the choreographers. It's my only passion. I can understand that, and I apologize for sounding suspicious. I suspect everyone at this point. That's to your credit, as the unofficial investigator in this case. Anyone who knew Max probably at one time or another wished him gone forever. I know I certainly did. You did, I said, failing to conceal my astonishment. My dear boy, he said with a loud chortle. I may have felt that way, but I would never act on such an impulse. Then the question remains, I said. Who would? Marshal Xander forced a smile. I'm sure you'll find the answer and put this horrible matter to rest. Just remember that I'm always available for any help you might need. Thanks, I said as I tried to suppress a slight shudder. We went our ways, he to some important meetings and me back to Snip's salon. But once again, I was stopped on my way out of the ballet studios, this time by Madame Rebinskaya. I thought I see you watching class, she said. It was imperative, I said, especially the men. The old woman dismissed my comment with modest shrug. The dancers, they can do better, but they are young, and it is springtime. They have other things on their minds. Do you know what happened between Scott Malloy and Elisa Cortland? It's a shame, no. Such beautiful young people and always fighting. They make too much tragedy. They don't know how to enjoy their life. The police can't help much with domestic squabbles. But he was hitting her. Is that true? I said. The old woman shrugged again. Elisa says it, but who knows? She likes to live in big drama. Madame Rebinskaya, I ventured cautiously, do you know if Max Harkey kept a diary? Maxie had diary? Maybe. Did you ever see it? After a lengthy pause, Madame Rebinskaya replied coolly. I don't recall. Then do you recall the musical score to the Phoenix? Why are you asking me that to me? Because it's missing. So? I thought you might have some idea where it was. You are thinking now I took it? Not at all. Wash! I thought you were fine young men, but I see you are rude. I don't mean to be rude, but the only way to find things out is to ask, and sometimes the words come out wrong. May I ask you just one more question? Wearied now and huffing impatiently, Madame Rebinskaya said, No, you are not very nice boy. And having made her pronouncement, she walked off. I thought to myself, just because you say it doesn't make it so. I quickly improvised a mantra to undo Madame Rebinskaya's harsh verdict at me. I am a nice boy, I am a nice boy, I am a nice boy. But without the ruby slippers, nothing happened. One more time, I headed for the doorway. I wanted out of that place, but I'd just about taken 2 steps when I saw Rafik and Tony Di Natale entering the main lobby. They were jabbering and laughing together. Tony saw me first and pulled Rafik along with her. There you are, she said. I love what you did with my hair. It absolutely glows in the sunlight. Rafik grinned broadly. You make her very beautiful. He held her closely around the waist while she hung onto his shoulder. Thanks, I said. Where are you coming from? Tony replied, We just had the longest, most luxurious breakfast in the world at the Copley place. Have you ever tried it? Not yet, I said in stark opposition to her effusiveness. It's marvelous. You simply must do it. Rafik added, We were talking about music, and the time was flying by. It was very productive. The two of them radiated positive, creative energy. They were utterly pleased with each other and with the rest of the world, with all things bright and beautiful, and once again, I was struck by the broad range of Rafik's energy and how I got to witness the other end of that spectrum, the polar opposite of what I was seeing now with Tony Di Natale. What brings you here? She asked me. Max Harkey's murder, I answered bluntly. You're working so hard on that, she said. I'm sure you'll be the one who solves it. You'll be the hero. Yeah, I said. All that thought. Rafik was still grinning when he pulled Tony closer to him and put his other hand on my arm. We have rehearsal now, he said. I see you later. I'll be at the shop, I said. Thank you again for my hair, said Tony. It's too bad you can't sign your work. Rafik and I exchanged knowing glances. Sometimes I do, I said. They went off and I finally got to leave the studios of the Boston City Ballet. This time nobody stopped me but them. Who was left? I'd seen just about the whole cast that morning. I set out for Snip's as I was passing through Copley Square. I saw the Copley Palace and felt a strange urge in my body, a kind of undulation that begun in my belly, then ran up to my head and then down on my feet, before settling again in my gut. Perhaps it was just hunger, a subliminal suggestion from the breakfast enjoyed by Rafik and Tony Di Natale, but no, it wasn't breakfast or lunch that I craved. I stopped and looked at the massive structure of the hotel, so new and clean and austere next to the classical architecture around it. I stared at the modern building and let my eyes wander all the way up to the top, to the penthouse, where Rico was probably having a cup of coffee at that moment, and that strange, sensuous wave moved through me body again. And then I realized what it was. I wanted something that I hadn't identified before, and it was indeed a desire that Rafik had triggered, especially by the way he behaved with Tony Di Natale. What I wanted was some light sex, and I knew just where to get it. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.